to the aftermath of the Brazilian Grand Prix, in which so much took place, and I don't know, I haven't even really recovered from it. I'd completely forgotten until somebody reminded me today about Lance Stroll going off on the formation lap and then trying to get through the sand trap and beaching the car. I mean, what a nonsense that was. So yeah, still in sort of the euphoria of that race. Not necessarily, Max won, but it was a brilliant win by Max. But just it was such a great Grand Prix. And that was one thing. Secondly, that on the back of that Brazilian Grand Prix, we now have the news that we have a Brazilian in Formula One next year, which is Gabriel Bortoleto, who's leading the Formula 2 Championship. A very good karter and Formula 3 driver. Supported by Fernando. And I think Max has chimed in there as well. And that's very good. Very good for Formula One to have a Brazilian again. And good luck to him. I do feel a little bit sorry for Theo Pourchaire, who is one of probably the reserve driver for Sauber at the moment, whatever that means. And he's, he hasn't even been considered, really. And he was a Formula 2 champion not so long ago. But probably difficult to see where Teo's career is going to go now, Formula One-wise, that is. And you think, well, what happened to him? Why didn't they even think about running him? And all I can think of is, well, he went off to IndyCar with McLaren and now he's back and nobody cares about him anymore. And it's just kind of a shame that motor racing is like that these days, isn't it? You make one small mistake, maybe. It wasn't even a mistake, really, because he had nothing else. But some people might perceive that as a mistake. And, you're out. And the other thing, of course, is to say farewell to Valtteri Bottas, who he's had his fair share of wins, and he was always quick in a quick car, and he's done pretty well in a bad car as well. And he's a good bloke too, Valtteri. I'll miss him around Formula One, but I'm sure he'll be doing something or other and having fun. Good bloke, really good bloke, like his dad too. His dad's a great guy. I remember having to, we were outside the first corner in Canada one year, and he would say, I can't find anywhere to get a drink. And there was a stall around the back, which I'd seen selling white wine. I managed to get a sort of tumbler of white wine and take it to Valtteri's dad. And we sat there watching the first lap on the outside. Yeah, he's just a good bloke. What I like about Valtteri is a nice blend of having fun, not taking racing too seriously, but being very, very professional as well. Anyway, that's Valtteri, who obviously is being replaced by Gabriel Bortoleto now in Formula One. So for next year. And I'll go back because the first three, we had three super chat questions from Paulo Souza, who's a Brazilian. And the first was, actually it was Peter. Love your work. Thank you very much, Paolo. Very kind. Why did Bruno Senna, Piquet Jr., Nasra and De Grassi not work out in Formula One? As a Brazilian, I'm glad we are back. Yep, you're back in terms of the race being a brilliant one and also having Bortoleto there. But Bruno, yeah, I think, as I said a couple of streams ago, I think there was a moment in qualifying for the Spanish Grand Prix when Williams were quick and he just locked up at the end of the back straight on a very good lap, what would have been a very good lap to get him into Q3, and he didn't get through to Q3. And I think that one mistake, because Williams was really good that weekend. I think it was the weekend when Pastor won, actually. And that was the end of it. I remember thinking, could be the end of Bruno's real Formula One opportunities, because this was a real chance. It was a great lap and the car was good. And it kind of was, I think. I think he overthought things a bit. He's probably a little bit too intelligent to be a Formula One driver. And I love what he's doing now, racing those electric aircraft. His uncle would love that, wouldn't he? And Bruno himself did quite a lot of work with Rob Wilson in his early years to his advantage. And I remember once him memorably saying how much his uncle, Ayrton, would have loved those days with Rob, working on tiny little details of the art of driving. And yeah, so Bruno's good guy, still quick and still intelligent and still very good. Piquet Jr., yeah, well, that was all. I mean, after Singapore Gate, he was tainted goods, and that was the end of his career, really. Although, of course, the reason Nelson Sr., I'm going to say it, I think orchestrated the whole thing with Bruno was in order to get an extension of Nelson Jr.'s contract. And that worked for a while until the whole thing was uncovered, and then he, that was it. That was him. That was it for him. And I say Nelson Senior because, as I've also said in the past, he did actually plan a similar thing, deliberately to crash the car, the Brabham in this case, in '81 in the Argentine Grand Prix when Brabham had that very cool way of getting around the ride height rules, which was 6 centimeters at the time, and Brabham had a way of the car being legal, 6-7 centimeters off the road in scrutineering, but as soon as they were on the track, they could reduce. They lowered the car with an hydraulic leverage system, and the car was basically on the ground, developing massive downforce, and everybody else had to copy that in the end. But the big thing in that first race in Argentina was what happens if you can't get the car back up on the in-lap, Nelson? And you won the race, obviously. And they had this plan B of if he kept bouncing it over the curbs and it didn't come up, he would just crash it into the guardrail, so he wouldn't have to go into scrutineering. But it did come up, and he didn't have to crash it into the guardrail. So I'm pretty sure, some threads there. Felipe Nasra, yeah, he was good. He was very quick. I think he deserved more than he got from Formula One. By the end of his time in Sauber, he was right up there. He was quite capable of podium finishes and being very, very good. And very good professional guy, nice guy, got on very well with him. Very good with sponsors as well, used his head, sort of asset to any team really. And Formula One turned his back on him, I think, too quickly. Shame on Formula One in the case of Felipe Nasra. And Lucas de Grassi, yeah, well, he came into Formula One in that ridiculous budget cap era with Virgin, I think, wasn't it, with Manor Motorsport, John Booth. And it was just, it was never going to work, really. It was just a waste of a year. He was in Formula One, that's about all you could say. But the interesting thing about de Grassi is that Pirelli then did a lot of work with him as a test driver on all their tyres, developing their tyres. And I think a lot of credit, really, for the sort of the road in which Pirelli then took, and which we find ourselves today. And we shouldn't knock Pirelli too much, because as I said before, when you're in a monopoly, it's very difficult to find the balance between doing the job performance-wise, not overspending engineering-wise because you've got no competition, and making sure the tyres above all are very safe. And they've done a very good job with that. And I think Lucas de Grassi should take a lot of credit for that. Very systematic brain, very good brain, and he saw the future of electric racing long before most drivers. All credit to him, and applied himself to it. I think he's got a couple of other companies now, all to do with electric engineering, and just a good guy. Yeah. Good man. Had lunch with him in Richmond, Surrey, not that long ago, and he's just, he knows a lot about everything, really. Just a good bloke to talk to and have around. But anyway, yeah, Brazilians, all good Brazilians, and good that we've got another Brazilian in Formula One again, as I say. Paolo's next question. Who do you believe are the 5 fastest qualifiers in Formula One? Depends, of course, on what they're driving. And are they driving the best car in Formula One or the worst car in Formula One and trying to scratch this thing around, throwing it around, trying to get a time out of it? There are always so many provisos in questions like this. And how many laps you do in the car. They're all driving the same car. Are they on medium, soft? Is it wet? Is it dry? So many things. But off the top of my head, I would say Max, Charles, Russell, Norris. There's 4 already. This is why top 5 is so difficult, isn't it? Then you got Lewis, obviously, but I think he's lost a little bit of one-lap confidence because the Mercedes has been so bad. But in a very good car, I think you'd definitely include him for sure. But I would probably put Pierre Gasly in there. I think he's very quick, and it's shown. And if you put Gasly, you've got to put Ocon in there as well, haven't you? Speaking of which, imagine that's not a bad driver combination, is it? When you think now of how good Haas, Ferrari are, and now they've got the Toyota deal as well, keeping the Ferrari engines, but Toyota to sort of, I guess they'll be using the Toyota tunnel and Toyota manufacturing stuff, and it's probably replacing Dallara, and they've got Esteban Ocon, who's just finished second in the Brazilian Grand Prix, and Oliver Bearman, who ain't half bad either. Wow, amazing, really, isn't it? The turnaround there. Your final question, Paolo, is Colapinto might be a bit overrated. Thoughts? Well, my thoughts on that is that we all, because of new media and because of social media actually, and because of social media and because of instant headlines and instant clickbait and instant quotes, everybody likes to have, oh yeah, the future, he's changed the world of young drivers. Colapinto suddenly shown that it's the new era and he's the next whatever. Well, he's not the next Carlos Reutemann at the moment. As I said in the thing, you know, Carlos was on the pole for his first Grand Prix for a start. I'm not in any way decrying Franco. All I'm saying is Carlos was visibly a mega short corner driver, unbelievably good. And Colapinto, to my eye, is a sort of budding Lando Norris style driver. Wider entries, very, very good feel for all the inputs, but by no means an early turn-in driver of the type Max, Charles, Lewis, or even Oscar Piastri for that matter. And I think Antonelli actually goes into corners earlier and has got more feel for that than Colapinto. Colapinto has his own style. I'm not saying he doesn't have feel. He's got his own style, but he definitely drives more on the rear, definitely a wider entry. And that's why we saw him have some moments in Brazil, because he was catching the white line, as I said in the video. So is he overrated? Well, I never rated him as highly as everybody did. I'm not saying he hasn't got that potential, but I don't just immediately assume this guy's the next megastar on one race or two races. So I'm not in a position to say that I think he's overrated now. I think he's very, very good. But it depends how you rated him before Brazil in order to say whether he's underrated now or overrated, isn't it? Because, you know, I think the wet showed that all the guys who do turn in a little bit later and rely on the feel for the rear of the car, as I've always said, even in the dry, it's about how late they can brake. That's where their big advantage comes from. That's always a risky thing because the track is different all the time. And then you got crosswinds, you got oil, you got this. And so what you're not doing is creating a platform of managing all the variables and the dynamic weights in the way that a guy like Max can. And because of that, the way he's driving at the moment, it's not to say he won't develop, Colapinto will always be exposed to that sort of error in the way Carlos Sainz is. And we saw that in spades in the wet because it highlighted the importance of being absolutely pin sharp in your judgment of what you were doing. And if the tyres were going off or you hit a bump at the wrong place or there's a bit of wind or whatever it was and you got the white line, you were just off. And that's why we saw those guys, Sainz as well, going off. Oliver Behrman too. So, yeah. So is he overrated? Depends what you mean by overrated, of course, isn't it? So now I come back to my old thing here of I've now got this whole chat thing, box is frozen completely. We'll go back here now, I think, to try and see what's going on the... I had to go right back into the chat. There's another super chat here. Okay, there's no audio from Mr. Windsor, 7 minutes. Peter, there's no audio. Thank you very much, everybody. 11 minutes, no sound. Less, okay. Okay. All right, so what I'm going to do now is put this pop-up chat out again. Such a palaver, this, isn't it? If the thing didn't keep freezing, I wouldn't have to keep doing this. But such are the joys of live computer live streams. So what am I doing here? I'm changing this browser. Yeah. I was told, this is an easy thing to do when you're doing a live stream. Maybe it is, maybe it isn't. I don't know. We'll see if it works now. Okay, going to the top. There we go. Working now. Good. All good now. Working. We hear you now. Good. Rolling start. You're good now. Yeah, rolling start. That was. Yeah. It's okay. Works now. Paolo ruined your stream. How funny. Standing start. Your friend is a legend. Yeah. Well, that's Cameron. In case you all know. Thank you very much, Cameron. He's a good bloke. So how Lewis Hamilton feels, I guess. By the way, that I'll just put that up. The Lewis Hamilton thing, when I said, some of you probably thought, where's Windsor on? Of course, it's his last race with his pit crew. That's what that's all about. And he's going to have a different crew for the next 3 races. So he's saying goodbye and sorry he didn't have a better last race with this existing crew, which is absolutely true. I'd completely forgotten that Mercedes do all that palaver. I mean, we never did that at Williams, A, and B, maybe they do now, I don't know. But B, if I think about a good race team today, good earthy race team, I think of what? I don't know, Ferrari maybe? Do Ferrari do all that changing around of pit crew? Of course they don't. They just have the same crew all year on the car. So it never even occurred to me that stuff was still going on at Mercedes. But anyway, that's what it was. So just as an explanation. And this is how Lewis Hamilton feels, I guess. It's quite a good thing. We're talking about my sound thing. Happens to the best of us, says Asit Koshan. Thank you very much. That's very kind of you. Okay. Marcus Strymon says, "Oh, my Peter, I'm so sad. This US election is a handful." Well, yeah, we better not get involved in politics. All I can say is I hope NASA put the brakes on everything for a while so they can use some different suppliers. That's all I'm going to say. Jay says, "I'm Canadian and we don't claim Stroll." Well, I mean, wasn't that ridiculous? And the most ridiculous thing about that, in my mind, was that for the entire weekend, Felipe Drugovich was in the Aston Martin garage doing nothing. I mean, he's a very quick driver, Drugovich, and he's going to slip through our fingers like Terry Pourchaire if we're not careful. Aston Martin quite clearly would and will never do anything with him. As I said, at the millisecond he signed that contract in the first place, when he gave him $600,000, I said, I can't believe that he's doing that, because he's never going to get a drive out of that thing. And there he is in the back. I mean, he would have done a very good job in that car, I'm sure. Mouse down. Dear Peter, will Piastri give up position for Norris again? Yeah, I think he will. If they're in that position. The big question, will McLaren be in that position ever again, is another question. For sure there's some momentum at Red Bull now, I would imagine. It'll be interesting to see how Vegas goes, won't it? But yeah, no, I think if Lando's behind Oscar and they've got a reasonably good domination factor going on over whoever's lying third, I think they will try to get Lando into the winning position. Yeah, they will. Bit late. And, those of you that follow my videos will know that a while ago now I did a video talking about the Lando's lost points, the 34 points that he's lost. And I think you could add a few more than that afterwards, since then. And yeah, it's all a bit late for me. And if the margin now was 34 points closer than it is, Max would still be on quite a lot of pressure. But now you've got to say the pressure's a little bit off now, and Red Bull can sort of not relax by any means, but Red Bull can just focus on doing a really good job, making no mistakes and getting on with it without having to worry about what's going on behind them. And I don't think McLaren did themselves any favour after the Grand Prix by allowing Lando to say Max's drive was all about luck and nothing to do with talent. And I've expressed my opinion on that on camera, but I will repeat it, which I think is probably the result of some journalist asking the wrong question at the wrong time, which seems to happen often, about something that he doesn't have an opinion about anyway, because I don't think Lando even saw Max during the race, did he? Was there a point when he was behind Max, able to watch Max and see what he was doing? I don't think so. So why would you ask Lando Norris what he thought of Max Verstappen's win? Because he'd have no idea, apart from just the results, that he started P17, got the benefit of a pit stop under the Reds and won the race. What's he going to say? Of course he's going to say, oh, well, he was lucky, wasn't he? But the reality is somebody should have briefed Lando at McLaren about, if he gets that sort of question, what he should say. And I think, what he should have been a little bit more respectful and gracious. He should have said, well, amazing drive. Of course, we had our own problems. And of course, he got the benefit of the red. But Max was really good in the wet. Maybe a couple of things there that we can all learn from. Wouldn't that be what most younger generation athletes would say about the slightly elder statesman who's just done something totally brilliant? But no, they didn't. They let him say that. And I can't imagine Lando feels very happy about having said that or being quoted as saying that at a time when he probably wasn't even in a position to give a proper opinion. Anyway, there we go. John Clark says it's far too early to say Colapinto's overrated. Well, exactly. It's kind of backing up what I'm saying, but I'm saying the reverse as well. It was much too early to say that he was the next Jackie Stewart or whatever they were saying. After 3 races or 4 races, just let things settle down. There are a lot of precedents of young rookies coming into Formula One and doing unbelievably well and then fading away and not doing so well. And we need to bear that in mind. Giancarlo Baghetti being a very good point. Won his first Grand Prix. Didn't do much in year 2 or year 3. Chuffmeister says he was literally laughing out loud watching Stroll. I wonder what his dad was thinking at that point. He's probably saying, something wrong with the car. Management team who's working on that car. Get rid of him. Ashit Koshin says they should have hired Vettel instead of Hulk. I thought Vettel had retired. I think right now Hulkenberg's quicker than Vettel. I mean, Hulkenberg, actually, he wouldn't be far outside my top 5 as very, very good qualifiers. He's really good under pressure, drives well. Well, I wouldn't say Vettel was as quick as Hulkenberg now. And the great thing about having Hulkenberg is that he has never been given this opportunity before at any stage in his career. And he's another driver that's got a brain as well as a lot of natural talent, and harnessed correctly with the correct motivation, which he will have because he's the lead driver there now. I think we'll see a lot coming out of Nico. And I think it's a surprisingly good choice, actually. I really rate Nico Hulkenberg, and I rate the way he thinks about racing. He's not that complicated. He keeps things relatively simple, but he gets on with it in a very Germanic, systematic way, and that's what they need. I think he'll do very well there. David Brown says, Hi Peter, do you think the FIA should change the red flag rule? For example, if you change tyres, you get a 30-second penalty. Well, the reason that came in at Monaco, didn't it? I don't know, about 10 years ago now. Why did they change it? I think it was because if it was very grey area. If you damaged the car and you damaged a tyre, in other words, but the car was repairable in the red flag period, were you entitled to a new set of tyres when everybody else was still on the old tyres? Answer, no. And so they said, well, in that case, let's just have a new rule where everybody can put new tyres on. So it's not as if we haven't had the situation you described, David. We have had it, and they decided that it was unworkable because when you have a red, it's usually because there's been some sort of shunt or there's debris or something like that, and inevitably people are going to have punctures and stuff. So that's why they allow them to change tyres. And sometimes you get the luck of the draw, sometimes you don't. And I made the point, I don't think Max would have lost that race if there'd been no red. I think he would have come in 4 or 5 laps later, and he would have come out 8, 9, 10 seconds maybe less behind the leaders, and I think he would have caught and passed them. I don't think it made that much difference. I think he was so quick and so good in the last phase of the race that he would have won it. So it's very easy to say that. I think in the case of the Alpines, they definitely beat the Mercedes and the Ferrari. The Mercedes and the Ferrari by staying out and getting a benefit of that call. And good luck to them. That's a classic thing you would do. Why wouldn't you? If you've been coming from the back of the grid and suddenly you got a chance to be leading the Grand Prix, first and third or whatever it was. Yeah, first and third. Then you take it. Track position is everything. And you think maybe there will be a red, the rain's getting worse. So it was a good call. But in Max's case, he stayed out because he'd done such a good job on that first set of tyres. Not only had been unbelievably aggressive in terms of passing people, not aggressive in the way he used the tyres. He'd used the tyres beautifully, but he was passing people, and obviously that he had a lot of energy going through the tyres. But he did have that period when he realised it was going to be difficult to get past Leclerc until things changed a bit. And at that point, he let everything sort of cool down a bit and just sat there very patiently. That was a very important part of the race for Max as well, I think. So yeah, there we go. Chuffmeister. One thing I also said when I wasn't on audio was that this isn't going to be the longest live stream, I'm afraid, for various reasons, most to do with my son's homework. I've got to finish it in about 30, 40, 50 minutes from now. Apologies for that. Won't be the normal 2-hour one, but and I know we lost a bit of time with the Stroll incident and the start was aborted. Anyway, Chuffmeister, Valtteri Bottas, pretty good for a number 2 driver. Yeah, absolutely. And there were occasions actually when he made Lewis look. Well, it made Lewis look good, but Bottas wasn't far behind him, was he? He was really good. Places like Sochi, he was always amazing. So yeah, good guy Bottas all round. I'll miss him in Formula One, and he had this ability just to be finding that right balance between being a good guy, enjoying life, and being a very good professional racing driver. And that's quite rare these days, actually. actually you can say to Valtteri, hey, Valtteri, and have a laugh and smile, Not many drivers respond these days. £5,000 fine to Peter for ignoring the audio stewards. Yeah, absolutely correct. Speaking of which, though, I think Lando did quite well to get away with only a €5,000 fine for being on the pole and making the wrong decision when it was an aborted start and actually leading what turned out the field around a lap when there was a stationary car there. I know it was all very slow speed, but the reason we have those rules is so that the marshals and whoever don't have to worry about racing cars going past them on the track. And in this stage, Stroll what was he doing? Faffing around in the runoff area. So, yeah, €5,000 fine. The others got €5,000, but not Lando, but including Lando. And I think he was the ringleader, as it were. And again, I've got to say, why wouldn't McLaren have been spoon feeding him at that point as to what to do? Because there are so many procedures that a driver has to think about. And when things are slightly out of the norm, i.e. an aborted start, it doesn't take much for the engineer or whoever, the strategy person, whoever it is, to get on the radio and say, just to go through it, Lando, don't move until you see green, or don't move just because the lights are flashing. Why wasn't somebody saying that to him? Again, you've got to question some of the stuff that's going on the pit wall at McLaren. Having said that, I don't want to be totally critical of the McLaren pit wall, because I think they did a good job in persuading Lando to stay out as much as they did. And even then, he probably came in too early. So, because I think his tyres, I can't believe they weren't in better shape than George Russell's, because he is in a McLaren after all. It's a better car. So why did he just cover George like that? I think, they're so reflex orientated in terms of, we got to cover this. He's coming, we'll cover him. But the weather was changing all the time. Conditions were changing. Yellows, reds, It just, to me, that was just like a reflex action that wasn't thought through, and they should have kept him out for longer. Nickel M says, why would you give a penalty if you change tyres in red flag? Are we giving a penalty for changing it in BSC or SC? Well, that's a repeat of what we were saying earlier. What you're saying is you shouldn't be allowed to change tyres, and that you're seeing it as a penalty for those that come in before the red. But there is no way around that based on the decision they took to have the rule as it is now. I don't think. And it's just no way around it. And there we go. As I said before. Johan Racing, Peter, if there is talk about tyre change under the red because of the disadvantage, shouldn't they also look at tyre change during a BSC or SC? There's a disadvantage there too. Yeah, but if you want to come in under a BSC or you can change tyres if you want. I mean, the point is the race has stopped and the clock has stopped on a red, and you get the free tyre. It's not a free one under a VSC or a safety car, is it? So it's not really the same comparison. I know where everyone's coming from, but we had that rule that you couldn't change tyres unless the tyre was damaged, and that was the problem. Quite a few cars did have damaged tyres, and all of a sudden everyone would be moaning if we had that rule and no one was allowed to change tyres except, I don't know, whoever it is, Nico Hulkenberg's team, who convinced the FIA that he got a slow puncture and had to have 4 new tyres, and goes off and wins the Grand Prix. Imagine if that happened. That's the other side of the coin if you have that rule. And nothing against Nico, of course. I'd love to see him win a Grand Prix, but you see where I'm coming from on that. So there we go. If anyone had any sense in Formula One, the grid looks obvious now. Carlos to Red Bull. Yep, I'd go for that. Colapinto to Williams. I'd go for that. And both of that I've been pushing for the last, ever since Carlos went ever since he signed for Williams. Max and Carlos versus Charles and Lewis would be some close racing in 25. Looks like the cars will be close. Yeah, obviously. I mean, I would love to see that happen. And I hope it will. And as I was saying to Cameron, he said, there's a bit of bad blood, we think, between Carlos Sr. and Joss. And I'm just putting this out there, but, you know, they do have rally in common now, and maybe that's something that will cement some sort of relationship, straight friendship, because obviously Carlos Senior loves his rallying, as does Junior, and Jos is doing, I think, 3 Belgian national rallies in the next in the next 3 weeks. I mean, he loves it. He drives a WRC2 Skoda Fabia, you know, mega car. So top man in my view. And I just, you know, if that doesn't happen, I'll be really disappointed. Really disappointed. What I'm saying, if Carlos going to Red Bull doesn't happen. Right. Let's have a look. Mouse Down says, oh, well, this is all they're talking about, kids with Kelly, PK and all that. But, you know, his and Kelly's offspring will have insane talent, most likely. Well, I think they probably will, won't they? Peter, this is from Frank GP123. Peter, you mentioned how good Vesti is recently. How much of a meritocracy is Formula One? Have you seen the likes of Hamilton, Verstappen, Senna, who just never got the right chance? Would Plato have been good enough? Jason Plato! How funny you mentioned Jason Plato. I think he probably would have been. He was really good, Jason, when he, you know, in his prime. Probably a bit wild, wasn't he? Oh, so many drivers. So many drivers. You know, I can't even begin to mention them, but I mean, Vesti is a good example at the moment of a guy that isn't on anybody's shopping list. He's there at Mercedes, obviously doing a very good job in the sim and going through setups overnight and things like that. But he is, you know, to me, the reason I talk about Vesti is because he is a really, really good short corner, early turn-in driver who's got a tremendous feel for the front end. And that was very clear in Formula 3 and Formula 2, very obvious in the way he drives. And yet nobody seems to mention that. Nobody talks about that. And for me, that how a driver drives and what he does with the steering, the brakes and the throttle is just as important as all the other things that people use to gauge drivers, i.e. his results, his handshake, how he looks, what clothes he wears, all the other things that everybody loves to talk about. But in my opinion, the most important thing is how you drive a racing car. And I think Vesti is absolutely a class act, the way he drives and uses the front end of the car. Brilliant. But he's not on anybody's list, because that means nobody actually, either they don't know or they don't understand, or worse, they don't care. Very sad. Best qualifier, JM Jadok says, Jarno Trulli. Well, there you go. I think one thing that's very true about Trulli is that he was very good on a new set of tyres. He wasn't very good when he had graining or understeer or the car went off in various ways. He could only drive the car one way, and he was super early into the apex as well, absolutely on the front end of the car, very, very early turn in, as I say, short corners, had all that, and great feel for even where to position the car on the straight. He'd spend 2 or 3 laps every session just seeing how close he should be to various walls, where he should position the car in terms of any crosswinds, things like that. Really good on detail. And yeah, a massive respect for Jarno. He just never really got around how to drive with understeer. That was his problem. And being involved a lot with that groove tyre era, it was not easy for him, obviously, but he was very good. And I don't think there's ever been a driver with better transition from, just seamless transition from traveling in a straight line to loading up the steering. You couldn't see the moment when it actually began. You could freeze frame it, but you could never actually just say, oh, that's the moment he's put in the steering. Everything was so gradual and so smooth. Just wonderful to watch. And yeah, no surprise Fernando got rid of him from Renault, because he was definitely, you know, I think there were some things about Jarno that Fernando didn't really understand, a little bit like Lewis. And so, you know, what's he doing going so quickly here? Get rid of this guy. So yeah, no, he was really good, Jarno. Good guy too. Really good bloke. Loved his racing. And named after Jarno Saarinen, of course, the great Finnish motorcyclist who was killed at Monza. And his dad was so moved by that he called his son after him. Right, that's the thing. I'm going through a few questions here that I'm not going to put up. Okay, Jasper Wallinger. Hello, Peter. Do you think Max got even higher heartbeat in his wet moments, or is he full in tunnel vision? Oh, I don't think he had a high pulse rate in that race. I think everything happened very calmly, in slow motion. He was absolutely. This is why I say it was one of those great moments, because he was absolutely in sync with the surface of the road, the inputs from the car, and what he was giving the car. And we saw that time and again in the way he was able to outbrake guys like. Outbrake is the wrong word, because he didn't actually brake later than Oscar Piastri going into one. He was just going quicker and didn't brake as hard, and then came out of the brakes and throttle and let the car settle at exactly the right moment, when a lot of other people would have just got skated off and just gone, oh, too quick, lost the back end or locked the front. He never got the car in a position where that was going to happen. And that isn't heartbeat adrenaline stuff. That's all very calm, patient, I'm in the zone stuff. And that's what that was. And you saw that after the race. I mean, as hard a race as that was, and the amount of concentration involved, he looked pretty fresh after the race. I was amazed. Jamie, I think, agrees with me. I should have maybe included him in the top 5. Says Hulkenberg is a great qualifier. Yeah, he is. Here's a super chat from Facts Gone Wacky. I've got to make sure this has come up, has it? Let me just check. Yeah, it has. Good. And I'm trying to make sure this doesn't freeze. I'm worried about Lewis Hamilton, his capability to sync with his car, no matter the state of car or track, especially against Russell, who's good, but as great. I hope Ferrari will not be a failure, also by replacing Sainz. Your thoughts? Well, it's one race, one terrible race, with Lewis saying that was the worst he'd ever felt the car. I think he means since 2020, beginning of 2022, probably. And you could see, it's the one thing Lewis never used to have when the car was very good was any of that shadow boxing stuff on the steering wheel. The picture on the onboard camera doesn't tell the whole story. Footwork is obviously a massive thing. But you can often see drivers who are doing quite a lot of this sort of shadow boxing, which is all just putting needless inputs through the steering, and yet you look at a guy like Max or Lewis and it's always like that. And it's not because the car's easy to drive, it's just that's the way they drive. Everything is perfect. And in this case, Lewis, there was a lot of shadow boxing with Lewis in Brazil. And I think that was a sign of he was just so unsure of the car and nervous of the car and what it was going to do next. And it was sort of a natural twitch, if you like, what is happening here? So don't judge him on that. Why the car was so bad for Lewis and why it was pretty good for George. I don't think it was as good as the McLaren, but it was pretty good, wasn't it? And George did a brilliant job. I think it's a function of, over time, Lewis has lost a lot of confidence in that car, and therefore a lot of confidence in what he can do to the car to make it work. All the things he used to be able to do don't seem to have any response to the car as it is at the moment. Whereas George seems to be able to work on the outlap, getting the temperatures right. He focuses on a couple of little details that get him the lap and get the tyres working when he needs to go out and do the lap. Lewis doesn't seem to be able to get the tyres working at all in the right zone at the moment. And that could be, he's tried wider entries, he's tried this. It could just be George is just a little bit more spiky with his inputs, always has been, always will be. And maybe the one thing Lewis can't do is be spiky. He can be late, he can open the entries a bit, he can try to get on the power a bit sooner maybe. He can try maybe braking a little bit later, doing all the funny things that he would normally not naturally do. But spiky is something he probably could never do. It's like playing a wrong note. He couldn't do that. And that's maybe what he lacks right now. And should we read anything into how he will go at Ferrari from what is happening in Brazil? I suspect there'll be a bit of a confidence thing, but not a physical thing in terms of how he drives the car. And if it's bright and sunny in Bahrain and the car's very good and Charles up there saying the car's brilliant, it's even better than last year, I cannot imagine Lewis Hamilton isn't going to be getting in that car and going pretty quickly from minute one. But if it's raining in Bahrain and the car feels like the Mercedes, maybe not. Neither of which will be the case, of course. But I think, Lewis, he's been around so long, 7 world championships, should have been 8. He's been around since 2007. give him a break. You give him a dog of a car in the rain, he's not going to get a good job do a good job in it. Whereas George, where he qualified, it was a different race for him, and where Lewis was, all that traffic and Behrman and racing the Hasses, just none of that would have been enjoyable for him. So there we go. Peter Van Breda says, no tyre changes under any period except the race. Well, what happens then if there's a red flag and the guy's got a puncture? That was the thing. You're saying you're out of the race at that point? You can change damaged front wing. You can replace damaged parts. So why can't you replace a damaged tyre? It doesn't make sense. So where are we? John Clark, wise words. One mistake and suddenly drivers are attacked on social media. Yeah, it's pathetic, isn't it? Facts gone wacky. I support Peter's work to chat. Oh, thank you very much. That's good. AB, Peter, I wish Oscar stops giving Lando free position now, as the world knows now that Lando is not world champion material yet. Oscar is more of a threat to Max than Lando. Yeah, I think he is world championship material. And, at the risk of repeating it, he should be 34 points ahead of where he is. And that's not bad when you think where McLaren were at the start of the year. They were as bad as Red Bull were good, really. So I think he is. I think he's done a really good job. I think he's been poorly managed on the pit wall, and they should have had a lot more points. And a classic example is a race he should have won is Baku. And that's Piastri got all the credit there. But had Lando got into Q2 and then Q3 and started on the front row, maybe the pole, I think he would have won that race in the way Oscar won it. And he didn't, because McLaren took this ridiculous decision to bring both drivers in 7 minutes from the end of Q1 when the track is absolutely packed, and they're out there running with Leclerc, who stays out there and then does the lap to get into Q2. And both the two McLaren drivers have to go back out on the same set of tyres, it wasn't even for new tyres, with time to do one lap when there's 20 cars or 18 other cars on track. Actually 17, I think Perez was in the garage as well. And, that's not good management. You in that situation on a street circuit like that, you keep your cars out there at all costs, as we saw with Leclerc. And because of that, the law of averages, you've got two cars in that situation, one of them is going to get a yellow. And yet Lando was the guy that got the yellow. That's not good management. And then, of course, I don't think he should have been told or should have given the position back to Oscar in Hungary either. But that's just a couple of things. There's more than that. Look at my video, the 34 lost points. Okay. So what am I trying to do here? I'm trying to get this blue arrow thing to unfreeze it, which probably means going up to a few points. Yeah, I'm going up to... There's a button here that says clear on the chat. Do you think I should press that? I'm just scared I'm going to clear everybody's questions out and never see them again, so I'm not going to do that. So we've done that one. And then we've done that super chat as well from AB. And then we got some more questions coming up, I think. Where are we? Sorry, just carry on amongst yourselves. Have a chat, have a drink. I can't get this thing to unfreeze now. Right, I'm going to put this back in the YouTube chat. I can actually see what's going on. Okay, I can. Your name may not come up on screen because I'm getting a bit annoyed with this whole thing. Andre Mogosen says he's talking to Paul Carter. Driver salaries are not included in the cost cap. If I'm not mistaken, that's correct. They're not. So yeah. Okay. Somebody saying the Alan C says, Peter, stop making excuses for Lewis. Well, I'm not making excuses for Lewis. I'm just talking about what's happening in front of our eyes. What excuses do you think I'm making there? I'm not don't really understand that one. You're saying that I think because I'm saying he's a 7 times world champion and he's got a lot of road dust under him, he's got a different view of life to George Russell. You think that's an excuse. It's not. It's reality. It's true. What do you want me to say? So, you know, sorry, it is. So let me try and get this back again, because it's so annoying, this, isn't it? I'm going to try and get the pop-up chat to work, which means I've got to have to do yet another thing on the browser link. Here we go. I have to go back to OBS and do new one. Okay, let's see if this works now. We've got another chat box down here. Get it here, go to here. Right, chat box. Right, Peter Van Breda says, Lando won't beat Max, Lewis and Alonso in equal cars. Well, you know, who knows? What do you mean by equal cars? Everybody's in Hyundai i20Ns, or is everybody in a Red Bull RB20 or Mercedes at its worst, or a Ferrari? You know, I'm not sure. I'm not sure you're right there. I think people underestimate how good Lando is. He's very, very good. I think his management on the pit wall and the temperament is, obviously, he's got his unique temperament, as we all have. And I like Lando's approach to racing, and I like the way he loves his racing and the way he loves his driving. But yeah, he's not James Hunt. That's for sure, in terms of his strong personality, or James's strong personality. I mean, if James had been in Lando's situation this year, there would be more than fur flying with Teddy Mayer around, I can tell you. Parshiv Shah, do customer teams get the same strength engine as the manufacturer? Yeah, the engines are all the same, and they're basically templated and sealed, and there shouldn't be any differences. Some teams will do their own architecture around it in terms of turbos, intercoolers, radiators, but that's really the only differences. Exhausts, maybe. Jay Tucker, do you feel Lewis would have been a 7 times world champion if Alonso didn't make bad career decisions? That's a very good question. I don't see Alonso as making bad career decisions. I see him putting the teams in positions where they just don't want to keep him anymore, and he's his own worst enemy in that, and he drives teams apart. That's the problem. We saw that at McLaren, and we saw that at Ferrari. And yeah, I think if Fernando had stayed at McLaren, I think he would have possibly won a world champ, probably would have won the 2008 World Championship. And I think if he'd stayed, he'd kept Ferrari. Well, and to do that, he would have had to have been very, got on with the team very well, which he wasn't. And at Ferrari, he would have had to have done a much better job massaging the team as well, Felipe Massa and everybody, and that didn't go very well either. The only bad decision he really made was that he thought he would get a Red Bull drive if he walked out of Ferrari without checking to see whether he would or not, and he didn't. And Red Bull didn't pick up the phone. And so you would have thought he would be a logical replacement for Sebastian Vettel, but they didn't, because he'd already done too much damage at McLaren and Ferrari. That's how they saw it. I'm not saying that's how I necessarily see it, but that's how those two teams saw it. So, it's bad decisions at Ferrari. It's also the way he's run his career, and how he's got a sort of image of being a difficult guy that some teams don't want to have, because he might upset the harmony of the team, which Fernando obviously has brought on himself. And I think he could have won a championship at McLaren, yes. And he probably could have won another championship at Ferrari if he'd played the political game there, and been the nice guy. I think he could have won 2 more championships. So it wasn't just a question of choosing the wrong car. I mean, he had no option when he went back to McLaren. He had nothing else. It was his only drive. Darum says, I honestly think Carlos would beat Lando over a season. In what? The same car? In the same as a teammate, or what? We don't have George and Carlos together anyway. But anyway, yeah, okay, you're on touch. Your opinion. I think George is super quick, isn't he? I think he probably would beat Lando over a season. Yeah, you're right. Carlos, I'm not so sure about. I think Carlos might make more errors in qualifying than Lando. Alan C says, I don't agree with lots you say, Peter, but total respect. Well, thank you very much. Well, isn't that what life's all about? If we all agreed with one another, we'd have nothing to talk about, would we? Oh, yeah, we agree with that. Yeah, well, that's boring, isn't it? No, I mean, I've spent most of my life having people disagree with everything I say and write, so I'm used to that. That's only because I think I look at racing from a slightly different, wearing different spectacles to everybody else, perhaps. But then I did actually meet Jim Clark when I was in an impressionable age and sat down with him for a drink. Not many people can say that. Maybe that coloured me for the rest of my life. Maybe Lando should become, his tyre straights, maybe Lando should become Max's number 2 and try to pull a Nico Rosberg on him. At least they'll have more excuses with equal machinery and good strategy calls. Yeah, I think actually, I mean, seriously, I think Max would probably be okay with Lando in the other car. And Lando would probably be okay driving for Red Bull with Max. As I said, to me, it was a shock actually when Lando did renew his McLaren contract as early as he did, long term. I can't remember how long it is, but I'm sure it's through to 26 or 7 or something. I was amazed he did that because he could have been in another quick car, just out there. But because he's been with Zach so long, been just part of the family probably, and McLaren was his team, and he just never thought twice about it, I guess. And I kept saying, well, if it was Daniel in the other car, good decision. But Oscar Piastri in the other car, it's not really Lando's team anymore. It's part of his team. He's part of, it's not the full thing, is it? Prashad Banwari, since rain is the great equaliser, as seen with Alpine finishing 2nd and 3rd, what is your opinion on whether Red Bull will perform well in dry conditions? I would hypothesise Red Bull is the 4th fastest car. Well, they started to look a bit better in Austin. They very scrappy race by Max in Mexico, and definitely not in the same class as McLaren. And there were signs in the dry that the Red Bull wasn't bad actually in Interlagos. So, and I don't think the car would have been as good as it was in the wet. In other words, giving Max the feel he needed, unless it was somewhere near right now. So I think it'll surprise people. I think they'll be quite good in the dry as well. And when you say rain, the great equaliser, yes, it was. In terms of Alpine, I think they had a little bit of a leg up. But yeah, but Ocon was really good, wasn't he, in qualifying? And Gasly was, 11th and drove all the way up. We shouldn't forget that, 11th to P3. What a drive by Pierre Gasly. So yeah, without the rain, probably Alpine wouldn't have qualified that well, so you're right. Yeah. Hill Arimba, hi Peter, what's your take, and would you tell us a brief story on the infamous McLaren-Ferrari saga about spying? Thank you. Well, it's a long, infamous story that actually involves Fernando Alonso, because that, when I say, he basically was the guy that spilt the beans to the FIA because Ron, he didn't feel he was getting the right treatment from Ron, he and Pedro de la Rosa. And obviously from McLaren's point of view, that was an unforgivable thing. But equally, I was always, it was all Bernie and Max, basically, a way of getting at Ron, whom they never really liked and always wanted to see in trouble. And it was an outrageous thing that they could go and do and give him this whacking great fine. And reality is, it was begun, this is my opinion, right? My opinion, but it was all started by a disgruntled Ferrari employee who felt he didn't get a just reward for winning a number of world championships with Michael and Ross Brawn and John Todd. And so he felt he had a chip on his shoulder, and he secreted drawings from Ferrari to Mike Coughlin at McLaren. And Coughlin, instead of refusing them or passing them on to the FIA or whatever, sort of did what he did with them. And because they were kept secret, it was McLaren then that got the big fine. But it's always been odd to me that Ferrari didn't get a fine, because that's where it all started, really. But I suppose they thought, well, that's an internal thing with the disgruntled employee doing that. and that was Nigel Stepney, of course, who then ultimately, I think, committed suicide, it looks like. So the whole thing was a terrible thing, and in my opinion should never have happened. And it's interesting that the $100 million that Bernie and Max came up with is exactly the same size of money that Ferrari had been tempted with in order to break away from Formula One in a new championship. So it was a quid pro quo thing. So yeah, it was a very messy time. Not a happy time, actually. Imagine Lewis Hamilton in his first year having to go through all that stuff, as well as everything else that he had to face in his early time in Formula One. A lot of racist stuff going on as well. Hellfish, hi Peter, Argentine here. It's interesting. I was always told, especially by Carlos and others, that the adjective from Argentina is Argentine. It's not Argentinian. But anyway, you're Argentine, so I doff my hat to you. Fangio for us was the best, but in the same era we had the great Froilin. That was really eclipsed by him. Who do you think in this modern era was the most eclipsed pilot? Oof. Yeah, Froilin Gonzalez was just the Pampas Bull, wasn't he? He was just brilliant. Won Ferrari's first World Championship Grand Prix, 51 British Grand Prix, 4.5 litre Ferrari. And he was very quick. Bull of a man. Met him several times, actually. Lovely guy. My Spanish wasn't very good. His English was not very good, but we got on quite well. And I met him in Buenos Aires a few times, and once at Silverstone, I think. Anyway, we're talking about a situation where you've got this superstar driver. I would say a very good example of that would be Tony Brooks, because his era coincided completely with that of Sterling Moss. And if Formula One people with a feel for the past are asked about the 50s and the early 60s, one of the drivers they'll always mention is Sterling Moss, obviously. Not that many mention Tony Brooks, who in my mind was not far away from Sterling, about as far as Gonzalez was from Fangio. So I think there's a good example of a very, very good driver. I think also, I know there were different, slightly different times in terms of their careers, and I think obviously their careers went in different directions, but I always think John Watson was overshadowed by, to some extent, James Hunt, and not necessarily by another Brit, but maybe by Nicky, for example. I think John Watson was better, deserves more credit for what he did and how good he was. And I think Tom Price also was definitely overshadowed a little bit by James Hunt. I mean, Tom was very, very good, if you talk about British drivers. I'm going back quite a long way. I mean, you obviously would try to think of some modern ones. Let's try and think of ones in an era. I mean, the Gasly Ocon thing's interesting, isn't it? I'd say that most people now probably think, well, pretty equal. Very few would say, oh, he's better than the other one. So the Italians, I suppose Clay Regazzoni was another that was a bit overshadowed, I think, by who he was racing with and the era in which he was racing. I don't know, it's a good question. We could go on for hours with it, couldn't we? We really could. Carlos Reutemann, I think, was probably better than his results showed, or definitely was better. And had he had better career choices, maybe he would have won more than one championship, because of course he did win the 81 World Championship. He says rather bitterly. Anyway, here we go. Mouse down. What are the odds of Lewis getting his 8th World Championship next season? Well, as I said before, to do that, he's got to have a good Ferrari, a Ferrari that's more reliable than the McLaren or the Red Bull, and consistently quick at every circuit, really. Maybe we'll give them, say, 4 jokers where they're not very good, but let's say 20 races out of 24, they've got to be just about there or thereabouts with a good sweet spot, great car in the wet, the dry. And the sad fact is that if that is the case, Charles Leclerc's going to win a lot of Grand Prix and Lewis is going to be winning races, but whether he can beat Leclerc over a season in a Ferrari that good, I doubt, to be honest, just because he's new to it all and Leclerc's that good anyway. I can't see Lewis. I can see Lewis winning Grand Prix in a very good Ferrari for sure, and even in a mediocre Ferrari, you can probably win Grand Prix on the day, given all the variables that come in Formula One. But if it's a good car, which of course you've got to have to win a world championship, then it's difficult to see him beating Leclerc in a good Ferrari. That's it. Michael Lawless, do you think Liberty Formula One had a hand in keeping Checo around for the Americas races, or was that all Red Bull? I know he's not gone yet, but no, I don't. I think it was probably pounds, shillings and pence. As I said, the general estimate is that he brings about 40 million to Red Bull. The money that he's generated in Mexico because of his career. He's not, a rich guy, rich family background, none of that. He's just, because he's so successful in Mexico and he's a Mexican and the Mexicans love Formula One, this is the industry around him now, and that money goes to Red Bull. So Red Bull re-signed him, obviously, with that was part of the package that comes with Sergio Perez. And as I said a few times, if you consider 40 million and the fact that he's good enough to win Grand Prix on his day and he can get a few podium finishes as well, he's not bad as a second driver. Not bad at all. Not your young, super quick Antonelli, that's for sure. But he is playing his part in that team in a big way. And he's obviously pretty good in terms of the sim and other stuff. And in Mexico. So I don't think Liberty Formula One now. I mean, people often think about that. It'll be good for them. But then you see such stupid things happening and you think, well, why didn't Liberty stop that? And they don't. So I don't think so. I think it was a Red Bull thing. It'd be interesting to see what happens now. As I say, I would love to see him I'd love to see Carlos in the Red Bull. I really would. And I'd love to see Checo retire, to be honest, because I think it'd be the right moment. It sounds patronising, but I think he's had a great career in terms of winning Grand Prix and doing what he's done in Mexico, and he's got his family. Go and enjoy life. Jaeger7, hi Peter, what's your opinion on Johnny Herbert? Do you think he has a prejudice against MV1, or he just enjoys being in the spotlight of controversy since his Formula One career wasn't so glamorous and shiny? Oh, I thought you were going to say how good was he, and I was going to say mega oversteer driver. Incredible how he recovered from that shunt in F3000 at Brands that year. Really nice guy. Good sense of humour as well. Very nice man all round, I think. I don't know. I don't watch Sky, so I can't tell you. I don't even know what's been going on about that. I presume you mean Max there. And is he critical of Max's driving or something? I can't imagine he was. He's not. He's quite bright, Johnny, isn't he? Why would he be critical of Max? I don't know. I didn't watch it. I don't watch British TV, so I can't tell you, mate. Sorry. Peter Carroll Kraus. Hasta luego, y'all. Hi there. Henk Bogart. Lando was told to shut the engine off at the aborted start. Well, that's not enough, is it? You need to spoon feed these drivers and tell them. And also, don't, before that was obviously too late, wasn't it? Because he hadn't shut it off, and there he was going away. So, or was the radio not working? I told this story on Cameron's interview, but I'll tell you again. I was once standing by the grid in Hungary, not the year he won, when Jenson Button, who was on about the third row, didn't move off with the rest of the pack for the formation lap. And I asked later on after the race what had happened, and he caught them up and he got going. And I asked what happened. He said, oh yeah, Jenson had a complete mental blackout. He couldn't remember the start sequence at all. And we just had to sort of basically reboot the whole thing and just talk him through it. And then he got it going again. Oh yeah, that's right. So you think about these drivers, in those critical moments when things are a little bit outside the box, like an aborted start, you need to spoon feed the driver, in my opinion, in my experience as well. You need to spoon feed them. You don't just assume they know all the rules and just going to stick with them, because it's a high pressure situation. Aishna Mishra, what do you think about Las Vegas? Who has the edge, Max, Lando or Ferrari? Trying to remember what that Vegas circuit's like. It's long straights, isn't it? DRS everywhere. On that case, probably Ferrari, I would think. I think Red Bull will be a lot better than people think, because I think they're going to be making progress since Austin. And McLaren seem to have done so many upgrades. I can't imagine they've got any more budget to do any more, have they? So what we've got now is a good McLaren, but not wasn't very quick in a straight line. Lando was complaining about not being able to get past George, wasn't he? But then again, people always say, easy to pass it into Lagos. It's not easy to pass it into Lagos, because up the hill, you're inevitably giving away anything to the guy in front, even if you've got your DRS activation. Sorry, your DRS, what do they call it? The thing allows you to activate it anyway. And by the time you're pulling up on him, you're almost eyeing up the first corner braking area anyway. So that's why Max's passes were so good. I just couldn't believe how good he was on that. Anyway, getting back to the point, Lando kept saying, he said, I just can't do anything about the Mercedes. It's too quick in a straight line. And I wonder, that's an important point. Is that going to translate into the McLaren suddenly not being brilliant in a straight line on a circuit like Vegas in the dry? I doubt it, because we haven't seen that in other places. We didn't see it in Mexico, for example. It wasn't the case in Austin. But it might be, it might be something to think about. But I think Ferrari should be in good shape in Vegas. And I think Max will be not far away from Ferrari. The big question is how McLaren will be in a straight line. They'll probably be okay, and they'll probably be very good. Probably be a very good race, actually, on what is probably not a very demanding circuit, apart from the fact that it's a good racetrack because it's got all these DRS zones and bits of straight and slow corners. I think I'm right in saying that, or not. I can't really remember the circuit, to be honest. I can remember the 81 circuit. Right. Adrian John says, everyone talking about no tyre changes during the red flag need to grow up. Either you're lucky or you're not with the timing. Yeah, and also you've got to think about why they have the rule in the first place, as I keep saying. If you can replace other parts on the car, why can't you replace the tyres? Doesn't make sense. Well, it's not that it doesn't make sense. It just becomes completely and utterly unfair then. If one guy's got it's Abu Dhabi 21 then. You got a guy on a brand new set of soft tyres on a 4-lap sprint, and everybody else is on old mediums. What would everyone be saying then? That could easily happen if you didn't allow it, but you were allowed to change broken parts. That's the point. Sebastian Simeon says, hi Peter, I always thought defending a position aggressively by taking the inside and blocking the attacking car was something relatively new and not common before the 2000s. What do you think? No, that's always been the way to overtake, down the inside. That is the way to overtake. Oh, defending. I always thought defending a position by aggressively taking the inside and blocking the attacking car was something relatively not common. No, it's always been a way to defend. You always defend down the inside. That's Lando Norris defending into the second chicane on the opening lap of the Italian Grand Prix. He's on the inside. No way. His teammate of all people is going to try and pass him on the outside at the second chicane. Yeah. No, the only thing that's happened in recent times is that now, in order to have more overtaking, they're saying that if you try to pass somebody on the outside, you've got everything going for you. And if the guy on the inside deigns to move offline because he's on the racing line and moving a little bit wide on exit, he's going to get the penalty, not you. I think that is complete nonsense. But that's the only thing that's happened. That's what's changed. But defence, yeah, I mean, think about all those old Formula 3 days, the James Hunt, Bev Bond, Dave Morgan Formula 3 days when they were unbelievably close. And James, periodically would have a massive shunt and get out of the car and biff Dave Morgan, and they'd have lots of fighting going on. Dave Walker was brilliant too. They'd all be like this on the straight, slipstreaming like maniacs. But then the braking area would come and they'd all go vroom like that, and everybody defended, and it was normal. And they all drove very well, actually. I mean, there were those incidents, but they're all very good at what they were doing. Nippy Moto says, what do you think is going on with Lewis? We're watching the onboards. Russell car does seem to be better behaved. Does Hamilton need to swallow the bullet and copy Russell's setups? Oh, I think if there's a setup there that they think will work with Lewis and George has run it, they'll give it to Lewis. He's not afraid to do that. As I said, what you're seeing is a guy who on that day in Brazil was so lacking in feel with the car that he was just shadow boxing on the steering, and that was making things worse, in my opinion. Don't very often see that with Lewis. Very, very rarely. But, he just wasn't enjoying himself. Carlos, super chat. At age 27, Max is heading to his 4th championship. How many titles do you believe he will eventually end up winning? Well, it's a good question, isn't it? I mean, we have all these numbers, the number of Grand Prix, Fernando's done, whatever, I don't know. I think actually Is it 400 now? I think Vegas is his actual 400. They got it wrong. There were 2 races where he entered, but he didn't actually start. So I'm going to make a big thing about his 400th. Why is nobody celebrating it? Assuming it's 400. If it's not, whatever it is, 300, 200. But all these numbers mean nothing to me because they race so often and the point scoring system is so different that it's not relevant to anything at all. It doesn't mean anything. Any more than 100 kilometers an hour means anything compared with 100 miles an hour. It's 2 different things. So how many titles do you... It depends entirely on how long the seasons are and how long he wants to keep racing and how long he's in a good car. I mean, it's a bit of a facile answer, but how many do I think he'll end up winning? I think he'll end up winning 8. There you go. So there you go. Bored. Your name is Bored. I hope that's not because you're watching this live stream. Probably is. McLaren are going to be tough to beat in Vegas considering their performance in Monza, and Vegas is a low temperature circuit which will hurt Ferrari. Red seem to have improved and will be strong in my opinion. Yeah, McLaren will for sure be there. I'm just talking about tiny details of how quick they will be on the straight, because all of a sudden they weren't the quickest car in a straight line in Brazil. That's all I'm saying. Of course they'll be quick. I think Ferrari will be good there. That's what I would say for sure. Marco K says, thanks Peter for all your content. In an interview with Albon, he explains the steering input of Max and the way it made him very insecure. The way he said it was on a PC, the mouse at his fastest. Okay, I'm not really sure what that last bit means, but yeah, I've heard that Albon's talked a little bit about Max's driving, and I'm not surprised because Albon is a wide corner entry driver, very nice soft inputs. Not as seamless as Jarno Trulli, but in the same bracket, sort of. And that's his big thing. He's very, very soft and nice in the way he drives the car, but he's pretty wide. And we saw, you know, with that shunt, that if he, in those conditions, obviously that magnifies that style of driving and the problems with that style of driving. There's so little margin for error that if you do catch a rear, you're gone. And that's what we saw. So... yeah, I mean, I'm sure from where he sits, Max's steering inputs must be extraordinary, let alone his throttle and brakes when he hasn't got foot on either, and how quick he is. That's, to me, was what made that drive, was what he was doing when he had no throttle and no brakes. And the car was still unbelievably quick, going inside guys like Piastri. Okay. Fan Tien Dung. Hi Peter, what do you think about the chance that Carlos would go to Red Bull? Well, we've talked about this and I keep pushing for it and in my own way and doing all I can to make that happen and behind the scenes, but it probably won't. As I say, it falls under the heading of something that's too logical and too good to happen in Formula One. And I'm not cynical, but no, I'd love to see it happen. And what do I think the chances are? I have to say probably not much because, you know, that's the way of Formula One, isn't it? But it does seem a bit odd that Williams have committed to racing Colapinto and he's gone well, very well. And then in theory, he's just going to be sitting around in the garage doing nothing next year. Right. Mouse Down says, I'm really excited about the Constructors' Championship. Red Bull seems to recover and it's close. You're absolutely right. Adrian John, do you think McLaren has the Constructors' Championship wrapped up? No, it's not wrapped up. And I think that still quite a lot to play for. Darum, Lewis was 29 when he won his first with Merck. Michael was in his 30s when he won his first with Ferrari. Then again, Vettel was even younger at his fourth and won nothing afterwards. Yeah. Yep. He started young, Vettel, didn't he? And then he had that great car and he was brilliant in that Toro Rosso and Monza, and he just did a great job at Red Bull, upstaged Mark Webber, who was not slow at all. But then he just stopped getting any better. He just stayed the same. He plateaued out at where he was, which was this amazing V driver. So long as he had a great back end with lots of downforce at the back, he could do the rotation at exactly the right rate. But when they took all that away with the regulations and he went to Ferrari, he was lost, I think, and he just became a fairly averagely good racing driver that could, good enough to win Grand Prix, but not the Sebastian Vettel that was dominating the way he did at Red Bull. And that's because he just never got any better. If he'd really worked on his driving, on how to drive with a unsticky back end, I think he could have got a lot more out of himself.
But because he won 4 championships, he had so many people around him saying, "Oh, the great Sebastian, he's come to Ferrari, he's going to win the championship with us." He believed it all, I think. It's totally understandable. That's what happens, I think. That's why we should all hope that we're never successful or famous. Yeah. Ashwin, I'm going to have to make this the last one, guys. I'm really sorry, but I've got one more super chat after this. I'll do this one. Ashwin Georgie, how do you rank Senna, Schumacher, Hamilton, Max in wet weather? Senna, excellent. Schumacher, excellent. Hamilton, excellent. Max, excellent. I'd put Nigel Mansell in there as well. Jackie Ickx, Jackie Stewart, Pedro Rodriguez, and a few others. So there we go. One more. This is a super chat, I think. Andre Morgasan, thank you very much. What's the latest news with the 26 Formula? It was said that the cars will be difficult to drive. And on that subject, how do you think the Red Bull engine will fare? I think when the designers of new regulations are talking about their regulations, they're never going to say, "Oh, and these cars are going to be easy to drive as well. Monkey could drive them." They're never going to say that, are they? They're always going to say, "Oh, they're going to be difficult to drive." So I don't think you should put too much store in that comment. I think they will end up having a lot of downforce, and I think they'll be 50% electrified, and I don't really have much to say about them other than that. How will the Red Bull Ford engine fare? Being a massive fan of Phil Prue and all those races and championships he won at McLaren, and how great a job he's done at Mercedes powertrain, and now running the Red Bull Ford powertrain program, I think it'll be very good. I think he'll be very good. So they're in good hands. Very good choice of personnel there. Typical Christian Horner, really. Excellent. So there we go. Sorry, I've got to stop now, but I did make a promise to my son. So I've got to go and stand by that. And I'm very sorry about the aborted start. I'll try and get it right next time. It's just a function of how long a time has passed, I think, since I last did a live stream. There's so many things you got to get right. The one thing I forgot was the audio. But actually, when I looked at it, it was working. It was very odd. Anyway, I put it in a different socket. For those who want to know, the solution was just put it in a different swap the power cord with the other cord, the audio cord, in the same USB-C, and it worked magically. The magic of modern science, if that's what it is. Primo Communique says, Patrick, Brands Hatch 70, one of the greatest endurance wet race of Pedro Rodriguez. Indeed, BOAC 500, BOAC 1000, Porsche 917, absolutely brilliant. Mind you, he was showing signs of how good he was in the wet, which nobody noticed in the 68 Longford Tasman race when he finished second to Piers Courage, and then the 68 French Grand Prix in the wet. Jackie Ickx got all the plaudits, as he would, his first Grand Prix win, this young guy. I think he was only about 19. But Pedro was second. Nobody noticed that, really, or remembered it anyway. And he was good. He was absolutely amazing in the wet. Michael Lawless says, have you been to Lime Rock, Connecticut, USA? I haven't. Have I been to Lime Rock? Yes, I have. Of course I have. And I went there with Sam Posey. And Sam drove me around in an M3, I think, from memory. Scared the daylights out of me. Yeah, lovely, lovely place. Love it. I love that part of America and love that. I love Sam as well and his work, his art that he does. And Sam is an author and a writer. And Ellen, his wife, who's also equally talented. Yeah, I love it. And I met John Fitch there, funnily enough, before he passed away, who won the 55... what was it called? The Manx Grand Prix in the SLR, I think, Mercedes, with Fangio. Would that be right? I think so. Anyway, he was a factory Mercedes driver, American, and there he was at Lime Rock. Mega. So there we go. I keep saying that, but I've got to go. Thank you very much, everybody, for all of this. It's been very scrappy, as ever, with Windsor. Typical. But hopefully, one day, it'll all be seamless, like Jarno Trulli's turn-in. Yeah. So I'll make up for this with another live stream next week. Not quite sure when, but watch this space and we'll put one out. But thanks for watching for now. Take care. Be happy.